This is Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. Thune took his floor time on February 20th to register support for Kash Patel to become FBI director before a pair of votes. He then commented on the pending budget resolution and tax cuts under the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President, it's been 1 month since President Trump took the oath of office. Since January 20th, the Senate has been hard at work confirming the president's cabinet nominees, 18 confirmed so far. President Trump has more of his team in place today than any president has had at this point since 2001. And we've done this despite obstruction by Democrats. Every nominee has received a fair process, as promised, and the Senate will continue to keep its foot on the gas until President Trump's cabinet table is full. Mr. President, later today, the Senate will vote to confirm Kash Patel to be director of the FBI. Mr. Patel will lead the nation's primary federal law enforcement agency at a critical time. We've seen a heightened threat of terrorism in the homeland. Illegal drugs continue to come across the southern border and take the lives of too many Americans. Violent crime spiked in recent years and is still a problem in many parts of the country. And at the same time, the FBI has lost the trust of many Americans who fear the agency has become politicized. Mr. President, Kash Patel has spent his career working in criminal law and national security. He spent his first 8 years after law school as a public defender in state and federal courts in Florida. In 2014, he was brought on as a terrorism prosecutor at the U.S. Department of Justice, prosecuting terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab. From there, he went to work in national security for the House Intelligence Committee and then in the first Trump administration. He worked on the National Security Council, where he handled hostage rescues, among other sensitive missions. He also served as principal deputy for the acting director of national intelligence and later as chief of staff for the acting secretary of defense. Mr. President, as I said, the FBI has lost trust among the American people in recent years. Much of that stems from a perception that politics has infected the FBI's important work. And it's not hard to see why. In just the last few years, the FBI field office in Richmond, Virginia, circulated a memo suggesting that traditional Catholics could be violent extremists. In 2021, the Attorney General infamously instructed the FBI to work with local law enforcement to target parents who attended school board meetings. And of course, there is the FBI's apparent double standard when it comes to investigating President Trump and its repeated failures to cooperate with congressional Republicans. Mr. President, the next director of the FBI needs to focus on rooting out politics so the FBI can enforce the law, uphold the Constitution, and keep Americans safe. The Bureau also needs a renewed focus on empowering the FBI's field office to be good partners to local law enforcement. I'm encouraged that Mr. Patel has the support of the National Police Association, the National Sheriff's Association, and multiple state attorneys general, all of whom will be his partners in law enforcement should Mr. Patel be confirmed. We've unfortunately seen that no community is immune from crime, terrorism, or illegal drugs. And we need all law enforcement working together and focused on the real threats facing our country. I look forward to working with Mr. Patel to restore the integrity of the FBI and get it focused on its critical mission. Mr. President, one of the most significant accomplishments of the first Trump administration was the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This comprehensive bill reduced tax rates for every income bracket, doubled the child tax credit, nearly doubled the standard exemption, or I should say the standard deduction, and enacted pro-growth policies for American businesses of all sizes. And what were the results? A growing economy, higher paychecks for hardworking families, millions of new jobs, small business growth, higher than expected federal revenues. That's right, higher than expected. Government revenues since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act have exceeded projections by roughly $500 billion. An end to corporate inversions, which is the practice of moving U.S. company operations overseas for tax purposes. Practically every aspect of the U.S. economy was strengthened by this pro-growth legislation. And contrary to what my friends across the aisle like to claim, it was middle-class families, not wealthy Americans, who received the largest proportional benefit of the tax cuts. Now, let me just repeat that, Mr. President. It was middle-class families, not wealthy Americans, who received the largest proportional benefit of the tax cuts. Working families benefited from this legislation. Working families ended up with more money in their pockets. Working families had more breathing room because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Anyone who pretends that this wasn't the case is either ignorant of the law or being deliberately deceptive. Mr. President, the income tax cuts for individuals are expiring at the end of this year, along with a key small business tax cut called the Section 199A pass-through deduction. And none of our top priorities for this year, or I should say one of our top priorities for this year, is extending this tax relief. But not just extending it, Mr. President, making it permanent. As I and several other Finance Committee Republicans noted last week in a letter on this subject, and I quote, "A temporary extension of these pro-growth and pro-family policies is a missed opportunity. Businesses need certainty while investing in their companies, and taxpayers should not fear tax hikes due to congressional inaction," end quote. That's it in a nutshell, Mr. President. Hardworking Americans shouldn't have to live in fear of a tax hike every few years. And businesses need a clear picture of the tax outlook so that they can plan for the long term. Mr. President, making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent would protect hardworking families from uncertainty and ensure that they can keep more money in their pockets. And it would have significant long-term economic benefits. The National Federation of Independent Business reports that making the small business Section 199A deduction permanent would result in the creation of an additional 1.2 million jobs annually, with that number climbing as the law goes on. And the Tax Foundation reports that long-run gross domestic product would increase by a substantial 1.1%. The President has called for making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent, and I'm committed to ensuring that any tax bill we consider does exactly that. We have a real opportunity to improve the lives of Americans both here and now and for the long term, and we can't waste it. Mr. President, needless to say, drafting major tax legislation takes time. And Senator Crapo, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, has been doing an incredible job laying the groundwork for a permanent Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extension. But there's still substantial work left to do to arrive at a bicameral agreement. And we have to take the time to get it and do it right. As we continue to move full steam ahead on this key part of the President's agenda, however, there are other pressing priorities that need to be addressed immediately. When the President's border czar was here last week, he emphasized that the administration cannot sustain its effort to deport criminals here illegally without additional funding. And the last thing we want is to delay other parts of the President's agenda, like border security, while we do the work needed to arrive at a tax agreement that can pass both houses of Congress. That's why the Senate is moving forward on a two-part legislative plan to accomplish our and the President's top priorities. The first bill we consider will address immediate needs like securing the border and other key national security priorities. The second will focus on making tax relief permanent. The budget resolution we are taking up this week will address the border security part of the equation. And then we will take up a second budget resolution for the tax portion. I want to thank Chairman Graham for doing the work to get today's resolution to the floor, and I look forward to passing it later this week. Mr. President, I look forward to taking up that second budget resolution as well in the not-too-distant future to prevent a $4 trillion tax hike on hardworking Americans and making the individual and small business tax relief from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent.
Schumer focused his remarks on the budget.
Well, Mr. President, the Senate is in for a very long day and a very long night. Over the next day or so, Senate Republicans will try to advance a budget resolution that clears the way to cut taxes for Donald Trump's billionaire friends. Democrats are going to hold the floor all day long and all night long to expose how Republicans want to cut taxes for billionaires while gutting things Americans care about most: health care, jobs, public safety, national security, housing, education. This is going to be a long, drawn-out fight. This reconciliation budget bill is only the first step, albeit an important one. Days like today, where we vote on amendments late into the night, go a long way in revealing where each party stands and who each party is fighting for. Democrats are glad to have this debate. We're happy to have it a few more times if the Republican leader so wants. Democrats will show in each of these debates where Republicans truly stand deep down, not with working people, but on the side of billionaires like Elon Musk. If you become wealthy fairly and squarely, we don't begrudge you. But you're doing fine, and you certainly don't need a massive tax break. And yet that is precisely what Republicans are getting ready to do: give billionaires another tax break and make the American people pay the cost. If Senate Republicans really think the best solution for inflation is to put more money into the pockets of the billionaire class, Democrats will make sure the American people know it. We will expose Republicans' plan to cut health care so that billionaires can have another tax break. We'll expose Republican plans to gut housing, to defund NIH, stop cancer research, stop research into diseases that are hurting, harming, and even killing our loved ones. To cut nutrition, to make housing costs go up, to hurt food inspection, to stop the fight against bird flu here or Ebola overseas so that they don't harm us, doing all those things that make no sense so they can cut taxes for billionaires? No way, we say. That's the wrong for the American people. And the more they learn about it, the less they're going to like the Trump agenda that Republicans in the Senate are following. Republicans can spin their agenda however they want. They can try to pass one bill, 2 bills, 50 bills. It doesn't matter. They can slice and dice their policies in whatever order they wish. It doesn't matter in the end. The end game is the same for Donald Trump and the Republican majority: tax cuts for billionaires paid on the backs of working and middle-class Americans. That is not, absolutely not, what the American people signed up for. The American people want to see inflation go down. It's gone up in the last month, even though Donald Trump said it'll go down starting on day one. They want to see their paychecks go up. They want to see more jobs. They want to see better jobs. They want to see more ladders to the middle class. And they want to find ways to stay in the middle class once they get there. Republicans, meanwhile, have abandoned the working and middle class. In just 1 month, Donald Trump and Republicans have eviscerated so many of our institutions in order to cater to the whims of billionaires. Donald Trump has defied the rule of law. He's ignored court orders. He's even fancied himself a king, while all his billionaire friends spread through the government like locusts and put public services that serve tens of millions of people at risk. When Elon Musk holds court in the Oval Office and meets heads of state, Head Start programs and community health centers have seen their funding shut off. Donald Trump preaches about corruption and fraud, all the while ridding the government of its independent watchdogs and letting DOGE go through people's Social Security numbers and even their private tax and health data with virtually no guardrails, no check. All this chaos is by design. All this lawlessness has a goal. Everything we have seen over the last month from Donald Trump and Republicans has one end game in mind: undermine the rule of law in order to put more money in the pockets of billionaires like Elon Musk. Nothing criticizes the broken core of Republicans' agenda better than their tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy.
Thanks for listening to this FedNet podcast, and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.